The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the forward operating base as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her rifle scope for the 100th time that morning. At 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing barely 110 pounds, she had heard every variation of the same dismissive comment throughout her military career: "You're too small for combat." But on this sweltering day in Afghanistan, those words would prove to be the most dangerous underestimation anyone could make. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria's journey to becoming one of the most lethal snipers in Marine Corps' history began in the unlikely setting of her grandfather's farm in rural Texas. Born to a family of Mexican immigrants, she learned to shoot not on military ranges, but while hunting rabbits and coyotes that threatened her family's livestock. Her grandfather, Vicente, was a patient teacher who understood that precision mattered more than power. "Mija," he would tell her, "the rifle doesn't care how big you are. It only cares how steady your hands are and how clear your mind is." By the age of 12, Maria could consistently hit targets at distances that impressed even the local hunting guides. Her small stature, which would later become a source of mockery in the Marines, was actually an advantage in those early days. She could move through brush silently, position herself in cramped hunting blinds for hours without discomfort, and her naturally steady hands made her shots incredibly accurate. What she lacked in physical presence, she more than made up for in patience, discipline, and an almost supernatural ability to read wind patterns and calculate distances. When Maria announced her intention to join the Marines after high school, her family was divided. Her mother worried about sending her petite daughter into harm's way, while her father, a construction worker who had always taught his children that hard work could overcome any obstacle, supported her decision. Her grandfather simply smiled and handed her his prized hunting rifle, a weathered Remington 700 that had been in the family for 3 generations. "Take this with you," he said. "Not to carry, but to remember where your skills came from." Boot camp at Paris Island was everything Maria had expected and worse. The physical challenges were manageable. Her small frame meant she could excel at activities requiring agility and endurance. But the psychological warfare was brutal. Drill instructors would regularly single her out, questioning whether someone her size belonged in the Marines. Fellow recruits, initially protective, sometimes grew frustrated during team exercises when her shorter stride meant she couldn't keep up during long marches with full packs. But Maria had learned something important from her grandfather: you don't prove yourself with words, you prove yourself with results. During weapons training, she consistently outscored recruits who had mocked her size. Her shooting scores were so exceptional that instructors began taking notice. When the opportunity came to try out for advanced marksmanship training, Maria was among the first to volunteer. The sniper school selection process was designed to break candidates both physically and mentally. Out of 40 Marines who began the course, only 12 would graduate. The instructors made it clear from day one that they had serious doubts about Maria's ability to complete the program. Santos, the chief instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Peterson, announced on the first day, "I don't know what recruiter told you that you could make it through this course, but they did you a disservice. Snipers need to carry heavy equipment over long distances, maintain positions for days at a time, and engage targets at extreme ranges. This isn't a place for someone your size." The physical requirements were indeed brutal. Candidates had to carry equipment loads that weighed nearly as much as Maria herself. During stalking exercises, they crawled through rough terrain for miles, often spending 12 to 16 hours in a single position without moving. The academic portion was equally challenging, requiring mastery of ballistics, meteorology, range estimation, and advanced mathematics. Many larger, seemingly stronger candidates dropped out within the first 2 weeks. Maria's approach was methodical and humble. She never complained about the weight of her equipment, instead finding creative ways to distribute the load more efficiently. During stalking exercises, her small size allowed her to find concealment in places where larger Marines couldn't fit. She studied harder than anyone else, staying up late into the night reviewing ballistics charts and weather patterns. Most importantly, she let her shooting do the talking. The first major test came during the precision shooting phase. Candidates had to consistently hit targets at ranges from 300 to 1,000 yards under various conditions, while other Marines struggled. With wind calculations and elevation adjustments, Maria seemed to have an intuitive understanding of how environmental factors affected bullet trajectory. Her scores were not just passing, they were record-setting. She hit targets that other candidates missed by wide margins, and she did it with a consistency that impressed even the most skeptical instructors. Word of the small female Marine who was dominating sniper school began to spread throughout the base. Some viewed her success with admiration, others with skepticism. Rumors circulated that she was receiving special treatment or easier targets. These whispers only motivated Maria to work harder and shoot better. The turning point in Maria's sniper training came during what instructors called Hell Week, a series of exercises designed to simulate the extreme stress and physical demands of combat operations. Candidates were required to maintain sniper positions for up to 18 hours at a time, often in uncomfortable weather conditions, while instructors attempted to locate them using thermal imaging and experienced counter-snipers. On the third day of Hell Week, Maria found herself paired with Lance Corporal Jenkins, a 6'4" former college football player who had been one of her harshest critics. Their mission was to establish an overwatch position and remain undetected while observing a mock enemy compound for 24 hours. Jenkins made his feelings clear from the start. "Try not to slow me down, Santos. I don't want to fail because my partner can't keep up." The insertion point was 3 miles from their target location, through rough desert terrain filled with rocky outcroppings and thorny vegetation. Each Marine carried approximately 60 pounds of equipment, including rifles, ammunition, food, water, and observation gear. For Maria, this represented more than half her body weight. Jenkins set a punishing pace, clearly testing whether she could maintain the speed he considered necessary. What Jenkins didn't anticipate was Maria's superior understanding of efficient movement through difficult terrain. While he crashed through brush and climbed over obstacles using brute force, Maria moved like water, finding paths of least resistance and conserving energy at every opportunity. By the time they reached their destination, Jenkins was exhausted and breathing heavily. Maria appeared almost fresh, her breathing steady and controlled. The observation position required them to lie motionless in a shallow depression, barely large enough for 2 people, covered by a carefully constructed hide made of local vegetation. For the next 24 hours, they would take turns observing the target area through high-powered scopes, recording all movement and activity while remaining completely undetected by opposing forces actively searching for them. As the hours passed, Jenkins began to understand why Maria had excelled where others had failed. Her small size allowed her to remain comfortable in positions that would have been torturous for larger Marines. She moved with minimal disturbance when changing positions, and her natural patience meant she could maintain focus during long periods of observation without becoming restless or careless. More importantly, her shooting skills became apparent when they were required to engage simulated targets at extreme ranges. Using paint-marking rounds, Maria consistently hit targets at distances where Jenkins couldn't even see the impact points of his shots. Her understanding of wind compensation and bullet drop was so advanced that she began coaching Jenkins on his shooting technique, helping him achieve hits he had previously thought impossible. The real test came on the final night when opposing forces, equipped with night vision and thermal imaging, began an intensive search of their area. Maria's ability to remain motionless was extraordinary. She could control her breathing and heart rate to minimize thermal signature, and her compact size made her nearly invisible under their camouflaged position. When Jenkins shifted slightly to get a better view of approaching searchers, Maria placed a steady hand on his arm and whispered barely audibly, "Trust me. Don't move." For 3 hours, enemy forces searched within 50 meters of their position. Thermal imaging scopes passed over their hide multiple times, but Maria's meticulous construction of their concealment and her understanding of heat signature management kept them undetected. When the search finally moved to other areas, Jenkins looked at his small partner with newfound respect. "How did you know they wouldn't see us?" he asked. "Size isn't always a disadvantage," Maria replied quietly. "Sometimes being small means you can hide where others can't. Sometimes it means you don't generate as much heat or make as much noise. Sometimes it means you can be patient when others get restless." Their mission concluded with a successful extraction, and their performance was rated as exemplary by the instructor cadre. Jenkins, who had begun the exercise as Maria's harshest critic, became one of her strongest advocates. During the after-action review, he publicly acknowledged that her skills had not only ensured their success, but had taught him techniques he had never considered. The remaining weeks of sniper school saw a dramatic shift in how Maria was perceived by both instructors and fellow candidates. Her shooting scores continued to set records, but more importantly, her tactical understanding and fieldcraft skills proved exceptional. She graduated not just at the top of her class, but with scores that ranked among the highest in the schools. History. Gunnery Sergeant Peterson, the same instructor who had questioned her suitability on the first day, made a point of addressing Maria privately after the graduation ceremony. "Santos," he said, "I owe you an apology. I let my preconceptions about size and gender cloud my judgment about capability. You haven't just proven me wrong, you've shown me what a real sniper looks like. The Marine Corps is lucky to have you." Maria's response was characteristically humble. "Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant. I just want to serve my country and my fellow Marines to the best of my ability." As she prepared for her first deployment to Afghanistan, Maria carried with her not just the technical skills she had mastered, but a deeper understanding of how perceived weaknesses could become tactical advantages. She had learned to use her size, her patience, and her precision as weapons more powerful than physical strength or imposing presence. These lessons would soon prove invaluable in ways she could never have imagined. Maria's first deployment took her to Forward Operating Base Chapman in eastern Afghanistan, a dusty outpost surrounded by hostile territory where Taliban forces controlled most of the surrounding mountains and valleys. The base housed approximately 400 Marines and soldiers, serving as a crucial logistics hub and launching point for patrols into some of the most dangerous areas of the country. Upon arrival, Maria was assigned to 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, where she was greeted with the familiar mixture of curiosity and skepticism that had followed her throughout her career. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, was a career infantry officer who had served multiple combat tours. During their initial meeting, he was direct about his concerns. "Santos, I've read your training records, and they're impressive. But this isn't a shooting range. Out here, you'll need to keep up with infantry Marines during extended operations, sometimes carrying additional equipment and ammunition. Are you prepared for that reality?" Maria's response was simple: "Sir, I'm ready to prove myself in whatever way you need." Her first weeks at FOB Chapman were spent integrating with her assigned squad and learning the unique challenges of the local area of operations. The terrain was mountainous and unforgiving, with Taliban forces often positioned on high ground overlooking coalition supply routes and patrol paths. Improvised explosive devices were a constant threat, and enemy snipers had already claimed several American lives in the months before Maria's arrival. The squad she joined was led by Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a veteran of 3 previous deployments who had initially been skeptical about having a female sniper attached to his unit. "Nothing personal, Santos," he explained during her first patrol briefing. "But my Marines' lives depend on every team member being able to handle their job. I need to know you can do more than just shoot straight." Maria's opportunity to prove herself came sooner than anyone expected. During her third week at the base, intelligence reports indicated that a high-value Taliban commander would be moving through a valley approximately 8 kilometers from Phobe Chapman. The mission was to establish an observation post and, if the opportunity presented itself, eliminate the target. The insertion required a grueling 12-hour march through mountainous terrain, much of it under cover of darkness. Maria carried not only her sniper rifle and personal equipment, but also additional ammunition and observation gear for the team. The pace was punishing, and several Marines struggled with the altitude and weight of their equipment. Throughout the march, Maria maintained her position in the patrol formation without complaint or assistance. Even as the route became increasingly difficult, the observation post was established on a ridge line that provided an excellent view of the target valley but required the team to remain motionless and undetected for potentially several days. Maria's experience from sniper school proved invaluable as she helped construct concealed positions that would be invisible to enemy observation while providing clear fields of fire. On the second day of the mission, the target appeared not just the Taliban commander they had been sent to eliminate, but an entire convoy of enemy fighters moving through the valley. Initial counts suggested more than 30 armed individuals, far too many for the 6-man Marine team to engage directly. The mission parameters were clear: observe and report, engaging only if the high-value target could be eliminated without compromising the team's position. Through her rifle scope, Maria could see the convoy moving along a predictable route approximately 800 meters away. The Taliban commander was identifiable by his distinctive clothing and the deference shown to him by other fighters. The shot was possible but challenging. The range was at the extreme end of effective engagement distance, and the target would only be exposed for a few seconds as he moved between covered positions. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez faced a difficult decision. The shot was well within Maria's demonstrated capabilities, but failure would likely result in the team being compromised and potentially overrun by superior numbers. Success would eliminate a significant enemy leader, but might still result in a firefight they couldn't win. "Santos," Rodriguez whispered, "what's your assessment?" Maria studied the target area through her scope, calculating wind speed, temperature, and the slight elevation difference between her position and the target. "I have a clear shot, Staff Sergeant. Range is 823 meters. Wind is approximately 3 miles per hour left to right. Temperature is affecting bullet trajectory minimally. The target will be exposed for approximately 4 seconds when he moves from the vehicle to the building entrance. I can make this shot." Rodriguez considered the tactical situation. His team's extraction point was 3 kilometers away, and they could potentially reach it before enemy forces could organize an effective pursuit. The elimination of the target would significantly disrupt Taliban operations in the region. After several tense minutes, he made his decision. "Take the shot." Maria settled into her firing position, controlling her breathing and heart rate as she had been trained. The familiar weight of her rifle felt comfortable against her shoulder, and the scope picture was crystal clear. She made final adjustments for wind and range, then waited for the target to appear. When the Taliban commander stepped out of his vehicle, Maria's crosshairs were already positioned where she knew he would be. The mathematics of ballistics that she had studied so intensively in sniper school played out in real time as she squeezed the trigger with steady, controlled pressure. The shot struck exactly where she had aimed, and the target dropped immediately. The convoy erupted in confusion as fighters sought cover and tried to determine where the shot had originated. But Maria's team was already beginning their careful extraction. moving through predetermined routes toward their pickup point. The successful elimination of the high-value target marked a turning point in how Maria was perceived by her unit. Word of the precision shot spread throughout FOB Chapman, and Marine commanders began requesting her involvement in increasingly important missions. The success of Maria's first confirmed kill in combat established her reputation throughout the forward operating base, but it also painted a target on her back. Taliban forces in the region had suffered the loss of a significant leader, and intercepted communications indicated they were actively searching for the sniper responsible. Enemy fighters began offering substantial bounties for information about American snipers, and Taliban commanders issued specific orders to eliminate any long-range shooters they encountered. Despite the increased danger, Maria's commanding officers recognized her exceptional abilities and began incorporating her into increasingly critical missions. Her small stature, which had once been viewed as a liability, proved to be a significant tactical advantage in the mountainous terrain of Afghanistan. She could move through areas where larger Marines couldn't fit, establish firing positions in locations that others couldn't access, and remain concealed in spaces too cramped for most soldiers. Over the following months, Maria participated in dozens of missions, ranging from reconnaissance operations to direct action raids. Her shooting skills continued to develop under the pressure of real combat conditions, and she began to understand how the theoretical knowledge from sniper school applied to the complex realities of warfare. Each mission taught her something new about reading terrain, predicting enemy behavior, and adapting to rapidly changing tactical situations. One particularly challenging mission came when intelligence sources reported that a Taliban cell was planning a major attack on a coalition convoy route. The enemy fighters had established positions in a series of caves and rocky outcroppings that provided excellent concealment and overlapping fields of fire. Traditional airstrikes were not feasible due to the proximity of civilian populations, and direct assault would result in significant American casualties. Maria was tasked with providing overwatch for a reconnaissance team that would attempt to locate and identify specific Taliban positions. The mission required her to establish a sniper position approximately 1,200 meters from the target area, a distance at the very edge of her rifle's effective range. Weather conditions were poor, with gusty winds and intermittent rain that would significantly affect bullet trajectory. The reconnaissance lasted 3 days, during which Maria maintained her position despite uncomfortable conditions and constant threat of discovery. Through her scope, she observed Taliban fighters moving between concealed positions, mapping their locations and identifying key personnel. Her detailed observations allowed mission planners to develop a comprehensive picture of enemy strength and disposition. On the final day of the reconnaissance, the situation changed dramatically when the Marine patrol was discovered by Taliban sentries. What had been a covert observation mission suddenly became a fighting withdrawal, with 6 Marines facing at least 20 enemy fighters positioned in superior terrain. The patrol leader radioed for immediate support as his team came under heavy fire from multiple directions. From her distant position, Maria could see the tactical situation developing. The Marines were pinned down in a drainage ditch with limited cover, while Taliban fighters maneuvered to surround them. Air support was at least 20 minutes away, and other friendly forces were too distant to provide immediate assistance. The Marines would have to fight their way out or face being overrun. Maria's rifle was capable of reaching the target area, but the extreme range meant that even minor errors in calculation would result in misses. Wind conditions were constantly changing, making accurate shots extremely difficult. Additionally, the Marines and Taliban fighters were often so close together that the risk of hitting friendly forces was significant. Despite these challenges, Maria began engaging the most dangerous enemy positions. Her first shot eliminated a Taliban machine gunner who had been pouring fire into the Marines' position. The second shot took out a fighter who was attempting to flank the patrol from the east. Each shot required careful calculation and precise execution, as she had only limited ammunition and no opportunity for ranging shots. The psychological effect of accurate sniper fire from an unknown location was immediate and significant. Taliban fighters who had been aggressively maneuvering to surround the Marines suddenly became cautious about exposing themselves. Some abandoned their positions entirely, fearing they were being targeted by an unseen shooter. Maria continued engaging targets for more than 30 minutes, firing a total of 12 rounds and achieving 11 confirmed hits. Her shooting broke up several enemy attacks and allowed the Marine Patrol to execute a successful withdrawal to a more defensible position. When air support finally arrived, the remaining Taliban fighters fled rather than continue the engagement. The after-action report credited Maria's precision shooting with saving the lives of all 6 Marines in the reconnaissance patrol. Her ability to engage effectively at extreme range, under adverse conditions, while distinguishing between friendly and enemy forces, demonstrated a level of skill that impressed even the most experienced Marines at FOB Chapman. However, the mission also revealed a growing problem. Taliban forces were becoming increasingly aware of Maria's presence and capabilities. Intercepted communications indicated that enemy commanders were developing specific tactics to counter American sniper operations. They began using decoys, coordinating simultaneous attacks from multiple directions to overwhelm single snipers, and offering increasingly large bounties for the capture or killing of this small American woman who had been causing them significant casualties. The intelligence situation became serious enough that Maria's commanding officers considered temporarily removing her from combat operations. The risks were becoming too great, and losing such a valuable asset to enemy action would be a significant blow to the battalion's capabilities. But Maria argued forcefully against being sidelined. "Sir," she told Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, "I didn't come here to hide when things get dangerous. These Marines depend on overwatch and precision fire support. If I'm not doing my job because I'm worried about my own safety, then I'm not serving my country or my fellow Marines." The decision to keep Maria in active combat operations would soon prove to be one of the most consequential choices made by her commanding officers. As Taliban forces intensified their efforts to locate and eliminate her, Maria adapted her tactics, becoming even more elusive and deadly. She began varying her positions more frequently, using deception techniques to disguise her true location, and coordinating more closely with intelligence assets to stay ahead of enemy counter-sniper efforts. During this period, Maria also began training other Marines in advanced marksmanship techniques. Her small classes, usually conducted during brief breaks between missions, covered topics like wind reading, range estimation, and equipment maintenance. Many Marines who had initially been skeptical of her abilities became eager students, recognizing that her knowledge could save their lives in combat. The training sessions revealed another dimension of Maria's character that had been less apparent during her individual missions. She was a natural teacher, able to break down complex concepts into understandable components, and patient with Marines who struggled to master difficult techniques. Her approach was always humble and encouraging, never making students feel inadequate about their current skill level. "The rifle doesn't care about your ego," she would tell new shooters. "It only responds to consistent technique and honest assessment of conditions. If you miss a shot, don't make excuses, figure out what you did wrong and correct it next time." One of her most attentive students was Lance Corporal David Kim, a young Marine from California who had shown natural aptitude for marksmanship but lacked confidence in his abilities. Under Maria's tutelage, Kim's shooting improved dramatically, and he began serving as her spotter on certain missions. The partnership between the experienced female sniper and her eager student became one of the most effective sniper teams at FOB Chapman. The effectiveness of Maria's expanded role in training and mentoring other Marines created a multiplier effect throughout the battalion. Marines who had learned her techniques began applying them in their own operations, resulting in more effective engagements and fewer casualties. Her influence extended far beyond her individual contributions as a sniper. As autumn turned to winter. In Afghanistan, operational tempo increased significantly. Taliban forces, knowing that harsh weather would limit coalition air support and mobility, launched a series of coordinated attacks designed to overrun smaller outposts and disrupt supply lines. FOB Chapman became a critical node in the coalition response to this increased enemy activity. It was during this period that Maria participated in what would become her most challenging and important mission. Intelligence sources reported that Taliban forces were massing for a major attack on a remote outpost called Firebase Phoenix, located in a valley approximately 40 kilometers from FOB Chapman. The outpost was defended by fewer than 50 Marines and soldiers, but its strategic location made it essential for controlling key supply routes. The planned enemy assault was expected to involve more than 200 Taliban fighters, equipped with heavy weapons and supported by foreign advisors with military training. If successful, the attack would not only eliminate the outpost but also demonstrate Taliban capability to overrun heavily defended coalition positions. Maria was assigned to a quick reaction force tasked with reinforcing Firebase Phoenix before the expected attack. The mission required helicopter insertion into hostile territory, followed by a grueling march through mountainous terrain to reach the outpost. Weather conditions were deteriorating, with heavy snow and high winds that would make both air support and extraction extremely difficult. The helicopter flight to the insertion point was harrowing, with aircraft flying at extremely low altitudes to avoid enemy surface-to-air missiles while navigating through mountain passes in near-zero visibility. Maria, carrying her rifle and additional equipment, felt the familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement that preceded major combat operations. The insertion itself went smoothly, but the march to Firebase Phoenix revealed the true scope of the tactical challenge they faced. Through night vision equipment, the Marines could see enemy positions throughout the valley with Taliban fighters clearly visible as they moved supplies and weapons into attack positions. The enemy force was larger and better organized than intelligence reports had suggested. When the Marine reinforcement column finally reached Firebase Phoenix, the situation was even more dire than expected. The outpost's commander, Captain Williams, briefed the new arrivals on the tactical situation. Enemy forces had the base completely surrounded and had been probing the defenses for several days. Several Marines had already been wounded and ammunition supplies were running low. "They're planning to hit us just before dawn," Captain Williams explained. "Our best estimate is between 150 and 200 fighters, attacking from at least 3 directions simultaneously. We've got good defensive positions, but we're going to be heavily outnumbered." Maria studied the terrain around the outpost through her rifle scope, identifying potential enemy approach routes and looking for positions where she could establish effective fields of fire. The topography was challenging. Taliban forces could approach within a few hundred meters while remaining largely concealed, and the outpost's defensive perimeter was too large to cover effectively with the available personnel. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the Marines prepared for the expected assault, Maria worked with Captain Williams to develop a defensive plan that would maximize the effectiveness of their limited forces. Her experience with long-range precision shooting would be crucial, as she could engage enemy leaders and heavy weapons crews at distances where other defenders would be ineffective. The attack began at 0430 hours, just as Captain Williams had predicted. Taliban forces launched simultaneous assaults from 3 directions, using darkness and terrain to mask their approach until they were within a few hundred meters of the outpost's defensive perimeter. The initial barrage of rocket-propelled grenades and mortar rounds shook the ground and sent debris flying throughout the base. Maria had positioned herself in an elevated bunker that provided excellent visibility of the primary approach routes while offering good protection from indirect fire. Her spotter, Lance Corporal Kim, had volunteered to remain with her despite the extreme danger, knowing that effective sniper fire could be decisive in breaking up the enemy assault. Through her rifle scope, Maria could see Taliban fighters advancing in small groups, using boulders and terrain features for concealment as they moved closer to the American positions. Enemy leaders were clearly visible as they directed their fighters' movements, making them priority targets for precision engagement. Her first shot eliminated a Taliban commander who was coordinating the assault from the eastern approach. Man had been standing partially exposed while using hand signals to direct his fighters, and Maria's bullet struck him center mass at a range of approximately 650 meters. The immediate effect was visible as the fighters under his command hesitated and began looking for new leadership. The second shot targeted a machine gun team that had established a position on a ridgeline overlooking the outpost. The crew had been pouring sustained fire into the American defenses, forcing Marines to keep their heads down and limiting their ability to return effective fire. Maria's shot eliminated the gunner, and the assistant gunner abandoned the position rather than risk becoming the next target. As the battle intensified, Maria found herself engaging targets at ranges from 300 to 800 meters, often in rapidly changing tactical situations. Taliban fighters would appear briefly between cover positions, requiring split-second decisions about target priority and engagement angles. Her training and combat experience allowed her to make these decisions instinctively while maintaining the precision necessary for effective long-range shooting. The most critical moment came when Taliban forces managed to breach the outpost's outer perimeter on the western side. A group of approximately 20 fighters had infiltrated through a drainage ditch and were advancing toward the command bunker where Captain Williams was coordinating the defense. If they succeeded in reaching the command post, the entire defensive effort could collapse. From her position, Maria could see the enemy fighters moving through the compound, but engaging them required extremely careful shot placement to avoid hitting friendly forces. Marines and Taliban fighters were often within meters of each other, making precision absolutely critical. Additionally, the ranges were much shorter than her usual engagements, requiring different techniques and calculations. Maria began systematically engaging the infiltrating fighters, starting with those closest to critical facilities and working outward. Each shot had to be carefully planned and executed, as there was no margin for error. Her first target was a Taliban fighter carrying what appeared to be explosives toward the ammunition storage bunker. The shot struck him at approximately 200 meters, preventing what could have been a catastrophic explosion. Her next several shots targeted enemy fighters who were advancing on American positions, often hitting them just as they prepared to throw grenades or fire at defending Marines. The psychological effect of precision sniper fire was immediate. Surviving Taliban fighters became much more cautious about exposing themselves, slowing their advance and giving American defenders time to reorganize. Lance Corporal Kim proved invaluable during this phase of the battle, helping Maria identify targets and providing quick range estimates for closer engagements. His spotting allowed her to maintain a higher rate of effective fire, while ensuring that each shot was precisely placed to avoid friendly casualties. As dawn broke over the battlefield, the tactical situation began to shift in favor of the defenders. Taliban forces had suffered significant casualties, including most of their experienced leaders, and their coordinated assault had devolved into smaller, less effective attacks. Air support finally arrived in the form of attack helicopters and close air support aircraft, forcing the remaining enemy fighters to withdraw or face destruction from above. The final phase of the battle lasted another 2 hours as Taliban forces attempted to break contact and withdraw to safer positions. Maria continued engaging retreating fighters, focusing on those carrying heavy weapons or attempting to coordinate the withdrawal. Her shooting during this phase was particularly effective, as enemy fighters were forced to cross open ground where they were exposed to long-range fire. When the battle finally ended, the immediate area around Firebase Phoenix was littered with evidence of the fierce fighting. Taliban forces had suffered enormous casualties. Later intelligence estimates suggested that more than 60 enemy fighters had been killed or wounded during the assault. American casualties were significantly lighter, with 8 Marines wounded, but none killed. Captain Williams made a point of personally thanking Maria for her contributions during the battle. "Santos," he said, "your shooting was the difference between holding this position and being overrun. You eliminated their leadership structure and broke up their assault before it could overwhelm our defenses." The after-action analysis revealed that Maria had fired 47 rounds during the 6-hour battle, achieving 43 confirmed hits. Her accuracy rate of more than 90% under extreme combat conditions was unprecedented, and her ability to engage effectively at ranges from 200 to 800 meters demonstrated complete mastery of her weapon system. More importantly, her tactical understanding of how precision fire could influence the broader battle had proven decisive. By systematically eliminating enemy leaders and disrupting their command structure, she had turned what should have been an overwhelming assault into a manageable defensive engagement. But even as Firebase Phoenix celebrated its successful defense, new intelligence was arriving that would present Maria with her greatest challenge yet. The intelligence briefing that followed the successful defense of Firebase Phoenix painted a grim picture of Taliban capabilities and intentions in the region. Enemy forces, rather than being demoralized by their defeat, had apparently used the battle as a learning experience to develop new tactics specifically designed to counter American advantages in firepower and technology. Major Rebecca Thompson, the battalion intelligence officer, explained the situation to the assembled Marine leadership. "What we're seeing is unprecedented coordination between previously independent Taliban cells. They're sharing information about our tactics, equipment, and personnel. Specifically, they've identified our sniper capabilities as a primary threat to their operations." The intelligence indicated that Taliban commanders had developed a comprehensive profile of Maria's capabilities and methods. They knew her preferred engagement ranges, her equipment specifications, and even details about her physical appearance. More concerning, they had begun implementing specific counter-sniper tactics designed to neutralize her effectiveness while maximizing the danger to her and her spotters. They're using decoys, coordinated distractions, and multiple attack routes specifically to force our snipers into disadvantageous positions, Major Thompson continued. They've also brought in foreign advisors with military training who understand how to counter precision shooting techniques. The briefing revealed that Taliban forces were planning their most ambitious operation, yet a coordinated assault on multiple coalition positions simultaneously, designed to stretch American forces thin and prevent mutual support. The primary target appeared to be forward operating base Chapman itself, but intelligence suggested that the main attack would be preceded by diversionary assaults on smaller outposts. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison faced a difficult decision. Maria's effectiveness in combat was undeniable, but the specific targeting of her by enemy forces created risks that extended beyond her personal safety. If Taliban forces succeeded in eliminating her, it would represent both a tactical loss and a significant psychological victory for the enemy. After extensive discussion with his staff, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison made the decision to continue utilizing Maria's capabilities while implementing additional security measures. She would be assigned a larger security team. Her movements would be more carefully coordinated with other units, and she would be given priority for extraction if missions became compromised. Maria accepted these additional precautions with characteristic professionalism, but privately she was concerned about how they might affect her operational effectiveness. The essence of sniper operations was stealth and flexibility, qualities that could be compromised by larger security details and more rigid coordination requirements. Her concerns proved justified during her next major mission. Intelligence had identified a Taliban supply convoy moving through a remote mountain pass, carrying weapons and ammunition to enemy forces, preparing for the anticipated major assault. The convoy was heavily guarded and moving through terrain that provided excellent concealment from air attack, making it an ideal target for precision ground engagement. Maria was assigned to lead a 4-person sniper team, including Lance Corporal Kim as her primary spotter and 2 additional Marines for security. The mission required a 2-day insertion through hostile territory, followed by establishment of an observation post overlooking the target area. The movement to the target area revealed the challenges created by the larger team size. What Maria could have accomplished alone in 6 hours required nearly 12 hours with the full team. The additional personnel created more noise, required more complex route planning, and increased the risk of detection by enemy forces. When they finally established their observation post, the tactical situation was exactly as Maria had feared. The position that would have been ideal for a single sniper was cramped and uncomfortable for 4 Marines. The additional equipment required by the larger team created a larger signature that was more difficult to conceal from enemy observation. Despite these challenges, the mission proceeded according to plan. When the Taliban convoy appeared, Maria was able to engage the lead vehicle at a range of approximately 900 meters, eliminating the driver and causing the convoy to halt in the kill zone. Follow-up shots disabled 2 additional vehicles and eliminated several enemy fighters who attempted to establish defensive positions. However, the success of the engagement was overshadowed by the extraction phase of the mission. Taliban forces had detected the sniper team's position and were moving to surround them. The larger team size, which was supposed to provide additional security, actually made movement more difficult and extraction more complex. During the fighting withdrawal, one of the security Marines was wounded by enemy fire, requiring the team to slow their movement and provide medical attention. Maria found herself in the unfamiliar position of having to balance her sniper capabilities with the responsibility of ensuring the safety of her team members. The extraction ultimately succeeded, but the mission highlighted the tension between Maria's individual effectiveness and the institutional desire to protect such a valuable asset. Her commanding officers recognized that the very measures designed to keep her safe might actually increase the danger to her and other Marines. This realization led to a series of intense discussions about how to best utilize Maria's capabilities while managing the risks created by enemy attention. The solution that emerged was both innovative and dangerous. Maria would be given greater operational independence, allowing her to operate alone or with minimal support when tactical conditions warranted it. The decision represented a significant shift in how the Marine Corps approached sniper operations in Afghanistan. Rather than treating Maria as an asset to be protected, her commanders recognized that her greatest value lay in her ability to operate independently in situations where larger units would be ineffective or endangered. This new operational freedom came just as intelligence reports indicated that Taliban forces were finalizing preparations for their major assault on coalition positions. The attack, designated Operation Desert Storm by enemy planners, was scheduled to begin within days and would involve more than 500 fighters attacking multiple targets simultaneously. The intelligence picture surrounding Operation Desert Storm became clearer as various sources provided additional details about Taliban plans and capabilities. Enemy forces have been moving fighters and equipment into the region for weeks, establishing supply caches and coordination centers in preparation for what appeared to be their most ambitious military operation since the initial coalition invasion. Planned assault would target 5 separate coalition positions simultaneously, including Forward Operating Base Chapman, Firebase Phoenix, and 3 smaller outposts that controlled key supply routes. The timing was calculated to coincide with a period of poor weather that would limit coalition air support while providing concealment for Taliban movement. Most concerning was intelligence indicating that Taliban forces had brought in foreign advisors with advanced military training, including former special operations personnel from various countries who understood coalition tactics and capabilities. These advisors had been instrumental in developing the sophisticated coordination required for simultaneous multi-target attacks. Maria's new operational independence allowed her to participate in preemptive operations designed to disrupt enemy preparations. Working alone or with Lance Corporal Kim as her only companion, she began targeting key Taliban leaders and logistics nodes identified through intelligence gathering. One such mission took her to a remote valley where Taliban forces had established a major supply depot and coordination center. The facility was heavily guarded and positioned in terrain that made conventional assault extremely difficult. However, Maria's analysis identified several key vulnerabilities that could be exploited through precision shooting. The mission required a solo insertion, as even Lance Corporal Kim's presence would have increased the risk of detection beyond acceptable levels. Maria carried only essential equipment, her rifle, ammunition, food and water for 3 days, and basic survival gear. Her total load was less than 30 pounds, allowing her to move through the mountainous terrain with speed and stealth. Approach to the target area took her through some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan, areas where Taliban forces operated freely and coalition presence was minimal. Maria moved primarily at night, using natural concealment and her understanding of enemy patrol patterns to avoid detection. When she finally established her shooting position overlooking the Taliban facility, Maria spent nearly 18 hours conducting detailed observation. Through her scope, she could see the complex command structure that Taliban forces had established, with foreign advisors clearly identifiable by their different equipment and behavior patterns. The facility included ammunition storage areas, communication equipment, and what appeared to be a planning center where maps and tactical information were displayed. Most importantly, Maria identified several key leaders whose elimination would significantly disrupt the enemy's operational capabilities. Her first target was a foreign advisor who appeared to be conducting training sessions with Taliban fighters. The man was clearly experienced in military operations and was teaching enemy forces advanced tactics for coordinating complex attacks. Maria's shot, fired at a range of 740 meters, eliminated him instantly and sent the entire facility into defensive positions. Over the next 6 hours, Maria systematically targeted key personnel and equipment within the Taliban facility. Her shooting destroyed communication equipment, eliminated several leaders, and created enough disruption to delay enemy operations by several days. The psychological effect was even more significant, as Taliban forces realized they were vulnerable even in areas they considered secure. The extraction from this mission was complicated by enemy efforts to locate and eliminate the sniper who had caused such damage. Taliban forces launched an intensive search operation, using tracker dogs and systematically checking potential shooting positions. Maria's survival depended on her ability to remain concealed while enemy fighters searched within meters of her position. The successful completion of this mission, along with similar operations against other Taliban preparations, began to have a cumulative effect on enemy planning. Operation Desert Storm was repeatedly delayed as Taliban commanders struggled to replace eliminated leaders and reorganize disrupted supply lines. However, these successes also confirmed enemy intelligence about Maria's capabilities and methods. Taliban forces began implementing increasingly sophisticated countermeasures, including the use of decoys, electronic warfare techniques, and coordinated counter-sniper operations designed specifically to neutralize her effectiveness. The escalating tactical competition between Maria and Taliban forces created a dangerous dynamic. Each successful mission increased her value to coalition operations, while simultaneously making her a higher priority target for enemy elimination. The personal nature of this conflict was emphasized by intercepted communications indicating that Taliban commanders had placed an enormous bounty on her capture or killing. As Operation Desert Storm's launch date approached, intelligence reports suggested that Taliban forces had finally completed their preparations despite the disruption caused by Maria's preemptive strikes. The enemy had adapted their tactics to account for precision sniper threats, implementing redundant command structures and dispersed planning that made individual targeting less effective. The first phase of the Taliban assault began with attacks on the 3 smaller outposts, designed to draw coalition forces away from the main targets while testing American response capabilities. These initial attacks were more sophisticated than previous enemy operations, demonstrating improved coordination and tactical understanding. Maria was positioned at Forward Operating Base Chapman when reports began arriving about the attacks on the outlying positions. Each outpost was under assault by between 50 and 70 Taliban fighters, using coordinated attacks that suggested significant planning and preparation. The simultaneity of the attacks confirmed that this was the beginning of Operation Desert Storm. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison quickly realized that the attacks on the smaller outposts were diversionary, designed to force him to commit his reserves before the main assault on Phobe Chapman began. However, he also recognized that the Marines at those positions needed immediate support if they were to survive the coordinated enemy attacks. The decision he made would set in motion the events that would test Maria's skills and courage in ways she had never imagined, ultimately leading to the mission that would define her military career and save the lives of 200 trapped Marines. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's tactical dilemma was acute. Intelligence clearly indicated that Forward Operating Base Chapman was the primary target of Operation Desert Storm, yet the 3 outlying outposts were under immediate attack and desperately needed reinforcement. Committing his reserves to support the smaller bases would leave Phobe Chapman vulnerable when the main assault began. But abandoning those Marines would mean certain death or capture for nearly 200 coalition forces. The solution Harrison developed was audacious and relied heavily on Maria's unique capabilities. Rather than sending large relief forces that would weaken Chapman's defenses, he would deploy small, highly mobile teams capable of providing precise, devastating support to the embattled outposts. Maria would lead the most critical mission, relieving Outpost Bravo, which was defended by 80 Marines and under assault by an estimated 120 Taliban fighters. Outpost Bravo was positioned in a narrow valley surrounded by high ground that Taliban forces had occupied during their assault. The outpost's commander, Major David Peterson, had reported that his Marines were surrounded and running low on ammunition. Air support was unavailable due to severe weather conditions, and conventional relief forces would have to fight through multiple enemy positions to reach the base. Maria's mission was to infiltrate the high ground surrounding Outpost Bravo and systematically eliminate Taliban positions that were directing fire into the American defenses. Working alone to maximize stealth and mobility, she would have to cover nearly 15 kilometers of hostile territory and engage enemy forces at multiple locations. The insertion was conducted by helicopter at night, with Maria being dropped at a landing zone approximately 8 kilometers from the target area. Weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly, with heavy snow and high winds that would make both movement and shooting extremely challenging. However, these same conditions would provide concealment and limit enemy visibility. Maria's approach to the target area revealed the full scope of the tactical challenge she faced. Taliban forces had established positions throughout the high ground surrounding Outpost Bravo, with overlapping fields of fire that made it nearly impossible for the defending Marines to maneuver or return effective fire. Enemy fighters were well concealed and clearly experienced in mountain warfare. Through her rifle scope, Maria could see the desperate situation at Outpost Bravo. The Marines were confined to a small perimeter, with several buildings showing damage from rocket-propelled grenades and mortar fire. Enemy fire was so intense that American forces could barely raise their heads above their defensive positions, much less organize counterattacks. Maria's first target was a Taliban mortar position that had been systematically destroying the outposts' defensive structures. The crew was positioned approximately 650 meters from her location, partially concealed behind rock formations, but visible when they prepared to fire. Her first shot eliminated the gunner, and her second shot destroyed the mortar tube itself, removing one of the most dangerous threats to the surrounded Marines. The psychological effect of precision sniper fire from an unknown location was immediate. Taliban fighters who had been aggressively pressing their attack suddenly became cautious about exposing themselves. Some positions that had been pouring fire into the outpost went silent as enemy fighters sought better concealment. Maria began moving between shooting positions, engaging targets of opportunity, while gradually working her way around the perimeter of the valley. Each position required careful stalking to avoid detection, and she often had to crawl for hundreds of meters through snow and rocky terrain to establish effective firing angles. Her third and fourth targets were Taliban leaders who had been coordinating the assault from different positions. These shots, fired at ranges exceeding 800 meters in deteriorating weather conditions, required all of her skill and experience. The elimination of these commanders created visible confusion among enemy forces as subordinate fighters lost direction and coordination. As Maria continued her systematic elimination of Taliban positions, the tactical situation around Outpost Bravo began to shift. Enemy fire decreased significantly, allowing the defending Marines to reorganize their positions and begin returning more effective fire. Major Peterson later reported that his Marines could clearly see the effect of the precision shooting, even though they had no idea where it was coming from. The most challenging engagement came when Maria encountered a Taliban counter-sniper team that had been specifically deployed to locate and eliminate the unknown shooter who was disrupting their operation. The enemy team consisted of 2 experienced fighters with a high-quality rifle and scope, positioned in excellent concealment with a clear view of several areas where Maria might establish shooting positions. The counter-sniper engagement required all of Maria's tactical knowledge and fieldcraft skills. She had to locate enemy shooters who were specifically trained to remain concealed while simultaneously avoiding their detection of her own position. The contest was complicated by deteriorating weather and the need to continue engaging other Taliban positions that were threatening Outpost Bravo. Maria ultimately prevailed in the sniper duel through superior patience and movement techniques. While the Taliban team remained in a fixed position waiting for her to reveal herself, she used her small size and understanding of terrain to approach their location from an unexpected angle. Her shot, fired at close range through thick vegetation, eliminated both enemy snipers simultaneously. With the counter-sniper threat eliminated, Maria was able to resume systematic engagement of Taliban positions around the outpost perimeter. Over the course of 6 hours, she fired 37 rounds and achieved 34 confirmed hits, eliminating key leaders, weapons crews, and fighters in critical positions. The cumulative effect of her shooting was decisive. Taliban forces, having lost most of their leadership and many of their heavy weapons crews, began withdrawing from their positions around Outpost Bravo. The assault that had seemed certain to overrun the American position dissolved into an uncoordinated retreat as enemy fighters sought to escape the devastating precision fire. Major Peterson reported that the siege of Outpost Bravo had been broken and his Marines were no longer in immediate danger. However, Maria's mission was far from over. Intelligence reports indicated that Taliban forces were regrouping for renewed attacks, and other coalition positions remained under severe threat. The relief of Outpost Bravo represented only the first phase of Maria's most challenging mission. Intelligence reports indicated that Taliban forces, rather than abandoning Operation Desert Storm after their initial setback, were adapting their tactics and preparing for renewed assaults. Enemy commanders had apparently learned from their experience at Outpost Bravo and were implementing measures to counter precision sniper threats. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's voice crackled through Maria's radio with new intelligence. Santos, we're getting reports that Taliban forces are massing for a major assault on Outpost Alpha. They've got approximately 200 fighters moving into position, and the weather is preventing any air support. Major Williams has 120 Marines at Alpha, but they're about to be outnumbered nearly 2-1. Outpost Alpha was positioned in an even more challenging location than Bravo, situated in a bowl-shaped valley with enemy forces occupying the surrounding high ground. The tactical situation was nightmarish for the defenders, as Taliban forces could direct fire into the outpost from multiple elevated positions while remaining largely protected from return fire. Maria's movement to Outpost Alpha required crossing nearly 20 kilometers of hostile territory in increasingly severe weather conditions. Snow was falling heavily, and visibility was reduced to less than 50 meters in many areas. While these conditions provided concealment, they also made navigation extremely difficult and would significantly complicate any shooting she might need to do. The approach route took her through areas where Taliban forces were actively moving. To support their assault on Outpost Alpha, Maria had to remain constantly alert for enemy patrols while maintaining the speed necessary to reach the outpost before the main attack began. Several times she was forced to take cover as Taliban fighters passed within meters of her position. When Maria finally reached the high ground overlooking Outpost Alpha, the tactical situation was even worse than intelligence reports had suggested. Taliban forces had established positions throughout the surrounding hills, with heavy weapons and mortar positioned to provide devastating fire into the American defenses. The enemy had clearly learned from their defeat at Outpost Bravo and were implementing more sophisticated tactics. Most concerning was the presence of what appeared to be foreign advisors directing the Taliban assault. Through her rifle scope, Maria could identify several fighters whose equipment, tactics, and behavior indicated advanced military training. These advisors were coordinating the enemy assault with a level of precision and professionalism that made them extremely dangerous. The assault on Outpost Alpha began at dawn, with a coordinated barrage of mortar and rocket fire that shook the ground and sent debris flying throughout the American position. Maria, positioned approximately 800 meters from the nearest enemy forces, could see the devastating effect of the coordinated fire as buildings were destroyed and defensive positions were systematically targeted. Major Williams' Marines returned fire as effectively as possible, but they were clearly overmatched by the coordinated enemy assault. Taliban forces were advancing from 3 directions simultaneously, using fire and movement techniques that demonstrated significant tactical sophistication. Without immediate intervention, Outpost Alpha would be overrun within hours. Maria began engaging the most critical targets, foreign advisors, who were coordinating the assault, and heavy weapons crews that were providing the most devastating fire. Her first shot eliminated an advisor who had been directing mortar fire from a position approximately 750 meters away. The immediate effect was visible as the coordinated mortar barrage became less accurate and less frequent. However, Taliban forces had implemented counter-sniper measures based on their experience at Outpost Bravo. As soon as Maria's first shot was fired, enemy forces began using smoke grenades and coordinated movement to make target identification more difficult. They had also positioned multiple decoys in locations where snipers might establish firing positions. The enemy response forced Maria to constantly change positions while maintaining effective fire on critical targets. She found herself engaged in a complex tactical game, trying to anticipate enemy movements while avoiding the countermeasures designed to neutralize her effectiveness. The physical demands were enormous. She was carrying all of her equipment while moving through difficult terrain in severe weather conditions. Despite these challenges, Maria's systematic elimination of key targets began to have a cumulative effect on the Taliban assault. She eliminated 3 foreign advisors, multiple heavy weapons crews, and numerous fighters in critical positions. Each shot disrupted enemy coordination and reduced the effectiveness of their assault. The most critical moment came when Taliban forces managed to breach Outpost Alpha's perimeter on the eastern side. A group of approximately 30 fighters had infiltrated through a drainage system and were advancing toward the command bunker where Major Williams was coordinating the defense. If they succeeded in reaching the command post, the entire defensive effort would collapse. From her position nearly a kilometer away, Maria could see the enemy fighters moving through the outpost compound. The ranges were at the extreme limit of her rifle's effectiveness, and the tactical situation required split-second decisions about target priority and engagement angles. Taliban fighters and American Marines were often within meters of each other, making precision absolutely critical. Maria began systematically engaging the infiltrating fighters, starting with those carrying heavy weapons or explosives, and working toward those in supporting roles. Each shot had to be perfectly placed to avoid hitting friendly forces, while eliminating the most dangerous threats to the American defenders. Her shooting during this phase was perhaps the most challenging of her entire career. She was engaging targets at extreme range in poor weather conditions, while distinguishing between friendly and enemy forces in close combat. The mathematical calculations required for each shot were enormously complex, and there was no margin for error. The climactic moment that would define Maria's legacy was approaching, a final test of all her skills, courage, and determination. In a situation where the lives of 200 Marines hung in the balance, the situation at Outpost Alpha had deteriorated beyond what anyone had imagined possible. As Maria continued her desperate long-range engagement of Taliban infiltrators, new intelligence reached her through radio communications that changed everything. The attacks on all 3 outposts had been more successful than initially reported. Outpost Charlie had fallen entirely, with its 80 Marines either killed or captured, and Firebase Phoenix was under renewed assault by a force estimated at over 300 Taliban fighters. But the most shocking revelation came from Lieutenant Colonel Harrison himself. "Santos, we've got a major problem. Intelligence indicates that the attacks on the outposts were designed to draw our reserves away from Chapman. We've got reports of at least 400 Taliban fighters moving toward our position. If Chapman falls, every Marine in the region is cut off from support and resupply." The tactical picture was now clear and terrifying. Taliban forces had executed a sophisticated deception operation, using the attacks on smaller outposts to force coalition commanders to disperse their forces. With Outpost Charlie eliminated and the others under heavy assault, nearly 200 Marines from Outpost Alpha and Firebase Phoenix were trapped in positions that would soon be overrun without immediate support. Maria found herself in an impossible situation. She was the only asset capable of providing effective support to the trapped Marines, but she was also critically needed for the defense of Fogue Chapman. The decision she made in that moment would determine the fate of hundreds of American servicemen and women. "Colonel," Maria radioed back, "I can break the assault on Alpha, but I'll need at least 4 hours to eliminate enough enemy positions to allow the Marines to withdraw. Can Chapman hold that long without support?" The silence on the radio lasted nearly 30 seconds before Harrison responded, "We'll have to. Those Marines at Alpha and Phoenix are counting on you, Santos. Do what you do best. Maria's mission. Parameters had just expanded beyond anything she had ever attempted. She would need to single-handedly disrupt Taliban operations across multiple locations, buying time for trapped Marines to execute fighting withdrawals while simultaneously preventing enemy forces from achieving their strategic objectives. The next phase of her operation required movement to a position that would allow her to engage Taliban forces, threatening both Outpost Alpha and Firebase Phoenix. The location she identified was a ridgeline approximately 2 kilometers from Alpha and 3 kilometers from Phoenix distances that would test her rifle's capabilities while providing visual access to both battle areas. The movement to this position was the most dangerous she had ever attempted. Taliban forces were actively patrolling the area, and enemy commanders had clearly identified the threat posed by American sniper capabilities. Multiple counter-sniper teams were operating in the region, and Maria had to assume that her general location was known to enemy forces, moving through the mountainous terrain while carrying all of her equipment required every bit of fieldcraft knowledge she had acquired. Throughout her career, she used natural concealment, moved during periods of reduced visibility, and constantly varied her route to avoid predictable patterns that enemy forces might anticipate. When Maria finally established her new firing position, the scope of the tactical challenge became fully apparent. Through her rifle scope, she could see simultaneous battles raging at both outposts, with Taliban forces clearly winning through superior numbers and coordination. At Outpost Alpha, Major Williams' Marines were confined to an increasingly small perimeter, while at Firebase Phoenix, enemy forces had breached the outer defenses and were fighting room to room with the defenders. The mathematics of the situation were daunting. Maria had limited ammunition, no resupply available, and needed to engage targets at 2 separate locations across a wide area. Each shot had to count, and she would need to prioritize targets that would have the maximum impact on both battles. Simultaneously, her systematic approach began with the elimination of Taliban commanders and foreign advisors who were coordinating the assaults. These targets were often the most difficult to identify and engage, as they tended to remain in concealed positions while directing their fighters through radio communications and hand signals. At Outpost Alpha, Maria's first target was a foreign advisor who had been directing the final assault on the American command bunker. The shot, fired at a range of nearly 900 meters in deteriorating weather conditions, eliminated the advisor and immediately created visible confusion among the Taliban fighters under his command. Her second shot targeted a Taliban commander at Firebase Phoenix who had been coordinating the breach of the outer perimeter. This engagement required rapid adjustment between targets at different ranges and elevations, testing her ability to recalculate ballistic solutions while maintaining the rhythm necessary for effective precision fire. As Maria continued her systematic elimination of key enemy personnel, the effect on both battles became increasingly apparent. Taliban assaults that had been proceeding with military precision began to lose coordination as leadership was eliminated. Fighters who had been aggressively pressing their attacks became more cautious, seeking cover and waiting for new orders that were increasingly slow to arrive. The most critical moment came when intelligence reports indicated that Taliban reinforcements were approaching both outposts, additional forces that would make the American positions completely untenable. Maria's radio crackled with desperate communications from both Major Williams at Alpha and Captain Rodriguez at Phoenix. Reporting that they were nearly out of ammunition and could not hold their positions much longer. Maria's response would require shooting skills that pushed beyond the limits of what anyone thought possible. She would need to engage multiple targets in rapid succession across vast distances while maintaining the precision necessary to avoid hitting friendly forces. The next 30 minutes would determine whether 200 Marines would survive to fight another day or become casualties of the most sophisticated Taliban operation of the entire war. The approaching Taliban reinforcements represented the final phase of Operation Desert Storm, a carefully coordinated assault designed to overwhelm the remaining American positions through sheer numerical superiority. Maria's radio intercepts revealed that enemy commanders were confident of victory, believing that the simultaneous pressure on multiple outposts had stretched coalition forces beyond their breaking point. Through her rifle scope, Maria could see the reinforcement columns approaching both outposts. At least 150 additional Taliban fighters were moving toward Outpost Alpha, while approximately 200 more were advancing on Firebase Phoenix. These fresh forces would tip the numerical balance so far in favor of the enemy that American resistance would likely collapse within minutes of their arrival. The tactical situation required Maria to make split-second decisions about target priority, while engaging enemies at ranges that tested the absolute limits of her equipment and skills. She would need to eliminate key targets in the reinforcement columns while simultaneously supporting the desperate defenses at both outposts, a task that would have been impossible for multiple sniper teams working in coordination. Maria's approach was methodical and ruthless. She began by targeting the leaders of the reinforcement columns, identifying Taliban commanders by their equipment, positioning, and the deference shown to them by other fighters. Her first shot eliminated a commander leading the force approaching Outpost Alpha, causing the entire column to halt and seek cover while subordinates struggled to assume leadership. Her second shot targeted a heavy weapons team in the column, approaching Firebase Phoenix. The Taliban fighters had been carrying a recoilless rifle that would have been devastating against the outpost's remaining defensive positions. Maria's shot struck the ammunition carrier, creating a secondary explosion that eliminated the entire weapons team and temporarily scattered the advancing column. The psychological effect of precision long-range fire on enemy forces who believed themselves to be beyond American reach was immediate and dramatic. Taliban fighters who had been advancing confidently toward what they believed would be easy victories suddenly found themselves under attack from an unknown location. The fear of invisible snipers began to spread through the enemy ranks, slowing their advance and reducing their effectiveness. As Maria continued engaging targets in both reinforcement columns, the defenders at the outposts began reporting changes in their tactical situations. Major Williams radioed that the pressure on Outpost Alpha had decreased significantly, with Taliban forces becoming more cautious and less coordinated in their attacks. Captain Rodriguez reported similar developments at Firebase Phoenix, noting that enemy fighters were seeking cover and appearing reluctant to continue their assault. However, Maria's ammunition supply was becoming critically low. She had started the mission with 200 rounds and had already expended more than 150 engaging targets across multiple locations. Each remaining shot would need to achieve maximum tactical impact, forcing her to be even more selective about target engagement. The most challenging phase of the mission began when Taliban forces, recognizing the devastating effect of sniper fire on their operations, began implementing sophisticated countermeasures. Smoke grenades were deployed throughout both battle areas, reducing visibility and making target identification extremely difficult. Enemy forces also began using coordinated movement techniques designed to make individual targeting less effective. Maria adapted her tactics accordingly, focusing on targets that remained visible through the smoke and dust while using her understanding of Taliban movement patterns to anticipate where key personnel would be positioned. Her shots during this phase required educated guesses about target location, based on limited visual information and tactical intuition developed through months of combat experience. The breakthrough moment came when Maria identified a Taliban communication center that had been established to coordinate the multi-front assault. The position was heavily defended and carefully concealed, but Maria's observation had revealed the pattern of messenger traffic that indicated its location. A precisely placed shot destroyed the communication equipment, immediately disrupting coordination between Taliban forces at different locations. With enemy communication disrupted and key leaders eliminated, the tactical situation began to shift decisively in favor of the American defenders. Taliban forces, unable to coordinate their movements effectively, began fighting as independent units rather than as part of a coherent assault. This fragmentation allowed the defending Marines to deal with smaller, less coordinated attacks that were within their capability to repel. Major Williams reported that his Marines at Outpost Alpha were successfully repelling enemy attacks and had begun organizing a fighting withdrawal to more defensible positions. Captain Rodriguez provided similar reports from Firebase Phoenix, noting that Taliban forces appeared to be losing momentum and coordination, but Maria's mission was not yet complete. Intelligence intercepts indicated that Taliban commanders were attempting to reorganize their forces for a final desperate assault on both outposts. Enemy forces still outnumbered the American defenders by significant margins, and a coordinated attack could still overwhelm the Marines' defensive capabilities. The final phase of Operation Desert Storm would test every skill Maria had developed throughout her military career. With ammunition running critically low and enemy forces adapting to her tactics, she would need to achieve decisive results with minimal resources. The lives of 200 Marines hung in the balance, and the next 30 minutes would determine the outcome of the largest Taliban offensive operation of the war. As Maria prepared for what would likely be her final engagement of the mission, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the small girl shooting rabbits on her grandfather's farm to the Marine sniper whose skills would determine the fate of hundreds of her fellow servicemen, every challenge she had faced had prepared her for this ultimate test of courage, skill, and determination. The final phase of Operation Desert Storm began with a desperate Taliban attempt to salvage victory from what had become a tactical disaster. Enemy commanders, recognizing that their sophisticated multi-front assault was collapsing due to the devastating effectiveness of precision sniper fire, made the decision to commit all remaining forces to simultaneous final attacks on both outposts. Alpha and Firebase Phoenix, Maria's radio intercepts, revealed the desperation in Taliban communications as commanders ordered their fighters to advance regardless of casualties, emphasizing that this was their last opportunity to achieve the strategic objectives of Operation Desert Storm. The enemy was committing approximately 300 fighters to these final assaults, overwhelming numbers that would succeed unless Maria could disrupt them with the limited ammunition she had remaining. Through her rifle scope, Maria could see Taliban forces massing for what would clearly be suicide attacks on both American positions. Enemy fighters were advancing with reckless abandon, knowing that their commanders had ordered them to succeed or die in the attempt. The psychological pressure of these desperate assaults would be enormous on the already exhausted American defenders. At Outpost Alpha, Major Williams reported that his Marines were in their final defensive positions, having withdrawn to the most defensible buildings in the compound. They had ammunition for perhaps 30 minutes of sustained combat, after which they would be forced to fight with whatever weapons they could recover from fallen enemies. The situation at Firebase Phoenix was equally desperate, with Captain Rodriguez reporting that his Marines were preparing for hand-to-hand combat in the final defensive perimeter. Maria had fewer than 20 rounds remaining, barely enough ammunition for a conventional engagement, much less the decisive intervention required to save 200 trapped Marines. Each shot would need to achieve results far beyond normal expectations, targeting enemy capabilities and morale with surgical precision. Her strategy focused on eliminating Taliban fighters, carrying explosives and heavy weapons, the assets that would be most devastating against American defensive positions. These targets were often the most difficult to engage, as they tended to remain in concealed positions until the final moments of their attacks. Maria would need to anticipate their movements and engage them before they could employ their weapons. Effectively, the first of her final shots eliminated A Taliban fighter carrying what appeared to be a large improvised explosive device toward Outpost Alpha's command bunker. The explosion that resulted from hitting the device created a crater and eliminated several additional enemy fighters, demonstrating the multiplier effect that precise targeting could achieve with limited ammunition. Her second shot targeted a recoilless rifle team that had been positioned to destroy Firebase Phoenix's remaining defensive structures. The shot struck the ammunition for the weapon system, creating another secondary explosion that eliminated the crew and destroyed the weapon. These spectacular results had psychological effects far beyond their immediate tactical impact, causing Taliban fighters to become increasingly cautious about carrying explosive devices. As Maria continued her systematic elimination of the most dangerous threats, the character of both battles began to change. Taliban assaults that had been proceeding with desperate determination started to lose momentum as fighters became reluctant to carry the weapons necessary for breaking through American defenses. The fear of precision sniper fire was beginning to override the orders of their commanders. With only 6 rounds remaining, Maria faced her most critical targeting decisions. Both outposts were still under severe pressure, and enemy forces were still advancing despite the psychological effects of her previous shots. She would need to achieve decisive results with these final engagement shots that would break the Taliban assaults and allow the American Marines to survive. Her analysis of the tactical situation identified the most critical threat, a group of Taliban fighters who had advanced to within meters of both outposts' final defensive perimeters and were preparing to throw grenades into American positions. These fighters represented the immediate threat to Marine survival, but engaging them would require shots at extreme angles and distances, while distinguishing between friendly and enemy forces in close combat. Maria's final 6 shots were fired in rapid succession, engaging Taliban fighters at both outposts with precision that defied mathematical probability. Each shot eliminated an enemy fighter who was in position to inflict casualties on American defenders, often hitting targets that were partially concealed or moving rapidly between covered positions. The cumulative effect of Maria's entire engagement, more than 180 rounds fired over 6 hours across multiple locations, finally achieved the decisive results that saved 200 American Marines. Taliban forces, having lost most of their leadership, heavy weapons, and momentum, began withdrawing from both outposts. The psychological impact of sustained precision fire had broken their willingness to continue attacks that were clearly failing. Major Williams reported from Outpost Alpha that enemy forces were in full retreat, abandoning equipment and casualties as they fled toward the mountains. Captain Rodriguez provided similar reports from Firebase Phoenix, noting that Taliban fighters were abandoning their assault positions and withdrawing in disorder. The successful defense of both outposts allowed American forces to execute organized withdrawals to more defensible positions while maintaining unit cohesion and equipment. What had begun as potential disasters that could have resulted in the loss of 200 Marines had been transformed into tactical victories through the application of precision, marksmanship, and tactical understanding. As dawn broke over the battlefield, the full scope of Maria's achievement became apparent. Intelligence estimates suggested that Taliban forces had suffered more than 400 casualties during Operation Desert Storm, with the majority of their experienced leaders and foreign advisors eliminated. The enemy's most ambitious military operation had been completely defeated by a combination of determined Marine defense and the devastating effectiveness of a single sniper. Maria's extraction from her final firing position required a helicopter insertion through hostile territory, as she was too exhausted to make the long journey back to friendly lines on foot. When the rescue helicopter finally reached her location, the crew found her still maintaining overwatch on the withdrawal routes being used by the Marines from both outposts. The flight back to forward Operating Base Chapman provided Maria with her first opportunity to fully comprehend what she had accomplished. Radio traffic indicated that all 200 Marines from the two outposts had successfully reached safety, with casualties far lighter than anyone had dared hope. The tactical victory had strategic implications that extended far beyond the immediate. Battle Taliban forces in the region would require months to recover from the losses suffered during Operation Desert Storm. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was waiting when Maria's helicopter landed at Phobe Chapman. His first words captured the sentiment of every Marine in the battalion. "Santos, what you did out there saved the lives of 200 Marines and broke the back of Taliban operations in this entire region. The Corps has never seen anything like it." The after-action analysis of Operation Desert Storm revealed the extraordinary nature of Maria's performance. Over 6 hours of continuous combat, she had fired 183 rounds and achieved 168 confirmed hits, an accuracy rate of more than 91% under the most challenging conditions imaginable. She had engaged targets at ranges from 200 to 950 meters, often while distinguishing between friendly and enemy forces in close combat situations. More importantly, her tactical understanding of how precision fire could influence large-scale combat operations had proven decisive. By systematically eliminating enemy leadership, heavy weapons crews, and key personnel, she had disrupted Taliban coordination and morale to the point where numerical superiority became irrelevant. The news of Maria's achievement spread throughout the American military and eventually reached the highest levels of government. Her actions during Operation Desert Storm would eventually result in her receiving the Medal of Honor, the first female Marine to be so recognized for combat actions. But more immediately, her fellow Marines understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had initially questioned whether someone Maria's size belonged in combat, sought her out personally after the mission. "Santos," he said, "I owe you an apology and a debt I can never repay. You saved my life and the lives of every Marine in my unit. I was wrong about everything: size, strength, capability. You've shown us what a real warrior looks like." Maria's response was characteristically humble. "We're all Marines, Staff Sergeant. We take care of each other. That's what we do." The impact of Operation Desert Storm extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. Taliban forces in eastern Afghanistan never again attempted large-scale coordinated operations, having learned that American precision capabilities could neutralize even overwhelming numerical advantages. Maria's achievement had demonstrated that individual skill, properly applied, could have strategic-level effects. In the months following Operation Desert Storm, Maria continued her combat deployments, but her role evolved beyond individual sniper operations. She became a teacher and mentor, training other Marines in advanced marksmanship techniques and sharing the tactical knowledge she had gained through combat experience. Her influence multiplied throughout the Marine Corps as the Marines she trained carried her lessons to their own units and deployments. The small girl who had learned to shoot on her grandfather's farm in Texas had become one of the most decorated Marines in Corps history. More importantly, she had proven that courage, skill, and determination matter more than physical size or conventional expectations about who can serve in combat roles. When Maria finally returned home after her deployment, her grandfather Vicente was waiting at the airport. As she walked toward him in her dress blue uniform, now decorated with ribbons representing her extraordinary service, he smiled with the quiet pride that had characterized their relationship throughout her life. "Mija," he said, embracing his granddaughter, "I always knew the rifle doesn't care how big you are. I just never imagined how many lives you would save by understanding that lesson." Maria Santos had proven that being called too small for combat was not a limitation. It was simply another challenge to overcome through dedication, skill, and an unwavering commitment to protecting her fellow Marines. Her legacy would inspire generations of warriors who understood that heroism comes in all sizes, and that the most important battles are won not through physical strength, but through precision, courage, and the will to never give up when others depend on you. The story of the Marine who was too small for combat had become the story of the sniper, who saved 200 Marines and proved that heroes are measured not by their size, but by the size of their courage and the precision of their commitment to their fellow warriors. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.